Group Dave Contact. You will see something that is not in YouTube. Today, we continue the topic called the large-scale system, key to a new understanding of the world. The point is that my theory of the large-scale harmony of the universe, which was presented on this channel Day TV. It was presented from the point of view of introducing the theory itself. Then I was asked to find an application of this theory in the practice of life. I found two uses. One application to physics, the other two meanings. Today, we will probably consider the application in the field of physics after all. What is it about? The fact is that there are quite a lot of facts accumulated by science now, but from my point of view, they are very poorly systematized. If we systematize them correctly, taking into account the scale, that is, we take a scale vector, I will show how it is done in the future. Just now I'm doing such a preview, right? Here, to use a scale vector, to use consistency, we get some universal integrity. Well, there are several citations of famous physicists in support of this idea. Dmitry Bloch-Hintsov. To build a complete theory, there are always plenty of facts, only imagination is missing. Well, in this case, a systemic fantasy. The main function of cognition is not to search for information, but to generalize it according to Ankara. But I would say that here the emphasis is shifted a little to one side, in fact. The search for information and generalizations about these factors are very important. What do I base all my constructions on? On some discovery that I managed to make back in the 70s. I reported at a conference in Bork in the 78th year, and published the results for the first time in 1981 year in the journal Knowledge of Power. Here on the left is a picture from this magazine. Those who subscribed to this magazine in those years may even remember this article. For 20 years, I worked on this topic until I realized that, in fact, I had managed to open a completely new layer in understanding the world. And after that, I published the book Large-Scale Harmony of the Universe in the 2000th year. And here you see on the right such a scale on which almost all the known elements of our universe, the main elements, are located. For maximum, there is such a fundamental Planck length to the metagalaxy itself, but the main ones, of course, are in mass and in importance. Here, let me remind you what the scale axis is in my interpretation. This is the logarithmic axis of decimal logarithms, in which there are some numbers that mean the number of zeros at 10. If 10 is in the second degree, it means 100. If in the third, it means 1,000. Therefore, you can translate it back, or do not pay any attention to it. What does it allow? This makes it possible here from the rotifer, this is the smallest animal, a multicellular organism, to secrete the largest organism, to arrange everything on one leaf. And moreover, from maxim to the metagalaxy itself, to arrange everything on one piece of paper. That's the approach. In other words, we pass everything through scaling, through the scale axis. For a long time, man and humanity have seen the world within 10 orders of magnitude, from the smallest grain of sand to the event horizon. It was exactly 10 orders of magnitude. With the help of the eye, a person can no longer see. But since the 1600th year, when microscopes and telescopes appeared, gradually this horizon expanded. On a large scale, and especially at the beginning of the 20th century, there was such a sharp surge, a sharp sweep of the horizon, large-scale horizons. They have increased sixfold. This is up to 61 orders of magnitude. It became clear that our universe is not just an Earth under a dome, around which planets rotate on gears, that there are other star systems, other stars, galaxies, but it went on and on until it reached the boundaries of the metagalaxy. They also began to descend with the help of a microscope. We saw cells, bacteria, viruses, molecules, atoms, nuclei of atoms, got to protons. Everything stopped there. In fact, theoretically, science can build some meaningful models up to the fundamental Planck length. The whole range, you see, is 61 orders of magnitude from -33rd to +28th. It would seem that why do we need to know all this? In fact, all of our modern achievements of the 20th century are based on penetrating deep into matter and on studying and going into space. I don't think there is a single technical tool here that could be obtained if it didn't exist. In other words, if we had not penetrated deep into the substance, we would not have received any nanotechnology, microchips. electronics, gadgets, or televisions, we would have received absolutely nothing. That is, penetrating deep into the structure of matter, science, and, consequently, engineering, created our world. Going up into space, creating telecommunications systems, satellites, etc. We began to study the planet and can communicate with you via the internet now with any person on planet Earth. After a while, we will probably be able to communicate with aliens using these means. But this all led to what? To the fact that the scale horizons have expanded dramatically. More and more scale layers have appeared. More and more scientists have worked on each layer, and more scientists. As a result, the whole science has turned into such a large-scale, layered Napoleon cake. Everyone works, a scientist, in some one layer, and sees no higher layer, no lower layer. Well, let's say if a person is engaged in sociology, then he studies cells, then he hardly knows anything about genetics. Well, maybe he knows genetics, but he hardly knows nuclear physics and cosmology. Cosmologists, as it is correct, do not understand anything about biology, and so on and so on. In other words, the world has divided into layers. This has led to the fact that the amount of information accumulates exponentially, if not by hyperbole. And this blows the brains of people who are trying to unite the world into some kind of integrity. As a reaction to this accumulated amount of information, a movement began back to the integrity. That was once achieved with the help of esotericism, penetration into the subtle world of the universe. That is, people began to see the world as a whole with the help of esotericism, and their rejection began to science. In other words, I know a lot of people, and now the most popular programs, books on esotericism. Why? Because both in esotericism and in religion, the world is integral, but in science, it is fragmented into separate fragments that create a mosaic of meaninglessness. That is, since there is no point in living in such a world. Therefore, people, escaping from this senseless picture of science, they turn back to esotericism and religion, go back there, to those times when information was perceived more holistically through the information field of the universe. And this gives people the opportunity to feel the meaning of their own lives. But in fact, science is not to blame for the fact that people perceive it this way, and nature is not to blame. But there are just a lot of facts that need to be systematized. And so, as a matter of fact, what am I doing? I'm systematizing this pile of junk scientific information along the scale axis. As a result, I get pretty enough pictures. Here is the image of this picture in the form of a Christmas tree, hung with gifts, right? Well, it's an image, of course. It is clear that this is a metaphor, that this is an image, that this is not really a Christmas tree. Here. But in fact, I will now provide only one toy from this Christmas tree, only one gift, and you will see how interesting it is, and how much it can be meaningful for all of us. Well, this picture of the universe, which I compiled on the basis of my regularities, which I managed to discover. It represents such a universal egg. This is a reminiscence on the theme of ancient ideas about the universe, as well as the egg, but there is a large-scale parameter here. Minus 33rd is the bottom, and 28th is the metagalaxy. That is, if you see below, then this is maximum. We pass through the cell nucleus, through the cell, through a person. The Sun, the solar system, galaxies, and get to the metagalaxy. In one picture, it's all in the form of a spiral. So it turned out that this whole universe is actually, it is quite clearly divided into three levels: the microcosm, the macrocosm, the megamirror. We ourselves live in the main macrocosm. This is our scale. The microcosm, well, we can disappear only with the help of reading, imagination, microscopes, pictures. Mega world, of course, we see stars, but our eye is able to distinguish no more than 1,000 stars in the sky. Here, but only in our galaxy, there are 10 billion of these stars, if not more. Can you imagine what we see in the sky? This is a tiny part of the universe, and there are still 100 billion galaxies. We don't really see anything, do we? But our knowledge allows us to build pictures. And here is this ternary structure, the large-scale structure of the universe. It is very interesting from the point of view of the concept of what kind of energy we will receive in the future. Here we have finished the introductory part with you, such a general part, as a matter of fact, the approach itself. And now we proceed to the matrix of meanings number 1. I have already reported here the matrix of meanings number 1 at the last meeting, but it was reported here only from the point of view of the ternary structure. I did not consider the applied aspects, but today we will consider the applied aspects of this matrix with you. So, the entire range of scales, for sure, I am responsible for my words. is divided into 3 sections of 20 orders of magnitude. Well, actually, there's a 20,37. We're going to omit all the details, right? Exactly, the entire range is divided into 3 orders of magnitude, into 3 sections. Microcosm, macrocosm, megamirror. You see in the picture, right? We live in a macrocosm. And then, you and I see only a piece of this macrometer, only 1 second part. What does this separation give us? Yes, here, by the way, the calculations are shown. You see, there is a microcosm, there is a weak interaction, there is a macrocosm, there are electromagnetic forces, and a megamirror where gravitational forces act. So it works, it does not mean that gravity does not act on the macrocosm. In fact, gravity forms megamegaspherical cosmic bodies. Electromagnetic forces form our macro, that is, we live in an electromagnetic world. In fact, of course, electromagnetic fields extend into space, but there they are already so weak that they do not actually create anything. And if we move to the left, we reach strong interactions that hold the nuclei of atoms together. That is, there are special forces there that mold the nuclei of atoms, do not let the atoms fall apart, and do not let our world perish. They have a very narrow range of actions, half the order. You see, there is a strong interaction here. To the left, darkness begins, the unknown. This is called the microcosm. It is also called the basement of Derek. The basement is generally dark. It's unclear what. Well, there are theoretical ideas about this basement. We're going to touch on them a little bit now. So, we have 3 plots. You see, there are 20 as many as 33/10 of an order here. This figure is amazing. Yes, in fact. Why? Because how is it that nature has divided everything into exactly 3 parts, right? How did the universe divide itself into 3 sections quite strictly? I checked, and really very strictly. The only explanation I have found is large-scale harmonic pulsations. These are nodes, these are standing waves. Standing waves, they naturally form some kind of nodes within the boundaries. And these nodes are always very strictly located relative to each other. If you remember physics, that's exactly how this rigor is formed. Here, the transition between the micro and macro world is a strong interaction, as I have already said, and the transition between macro and micro. There's a mistake. Between the macro and the mega world, an error in the text does not pay attention. This is from the chaos of forms to spherical bodies. Look, at the bottom, you will see that the cosmic dust motes are the smallest that can be, nanoscale. Then there are ordinary specks of dust, then pieces of meteorites, then there are asteroids, small asteroids, large ones. Here you see, we reach the 10⁷ degree. It's up to 100 kilometers, God forbid, yes. And now, after hundreds of kilometers, we no longer meet chaotic bodies, we have a sharp transition to symmetry. See, a spherical body is passing by. Why? Because as soon as we pass the border of the macrocosm, the baton is immediately intercepted there. Gravity begins to act. Gravity makes crystal spheres out of ordinary bodies. Like snowballs, we sculpt from snow. Gravity sculpts here, the snow can lie loose, but if gravity gets down to business, it makes spherical bodies. The transition here is very clearly specially shown. The asteroid Althea is the largest known asteroid in astronomy. It's 70 kilometers long here. There's a picture on the left, you see, right? Chaotic form. As soon as we cross the border, there are 200–8,300 kilometers of pieces. I don't remember exactly. We get the smallest planet in the solar system minus. Here on the left you see, it's chaos, and on the right, you see a spherical shape. Gravity also works. It's a very interesting feature, but in fact, I hang tags on these worlds, but it's actually very important, because it can be used not only for the universe, but also for the biosphere. I call the microcosm the world of elements, the macrocosm the world of objects, the omega world we call the world of systems. Elements, objects, systems. Just words, 3 different words. And behind these words, there are 3 different sciences, 3 different types of energy, 3 different philosophies. And we are going to demonstrate this to you now. Here is the same picture, the same range. Weak interactions, electromagnetic, gravitational elements, objects, systems. If you remember this picture, then you will have at least some idea of how the large-scale hierarchy of the universe works. The elements live down there. It's all about protons or neutrons, electrons, and so on. Objects begin above, They are made of these elements, and there are completely different laws there. Then the objects end, and you remember, the systems begin. What is the system? This is a planetary system, a galaxy. There are no bodies there. There is an indirect interaction there. Which ones? We're going to show you now. So, it begins from all this that I have told you. We are beginning to draw very unusual conclusions. It turns out that our entire theoretical science is a science built on the laws of the macrocosm. Well, of course, because physics studies macromy, right? They study bodies, electromagnetic interactions, structures, and other things, right? And this is only 1/3 of the range of the universe. This is the science of the Macworld, the science of objects. So, I assume that we are the whole of humanity, a distorted idea of what elements are and what systems are in the universe, a very distorted and weak representation. I'm going to demonstrate it to you now. We will start with the mega world of Millet systems. As we remember with you, it begins hundreds of kilometers away. This is the solar system, galaxies, with the accumulation of the galaxy and so on. There are a lot of riddles, but the most striking riddle is the paradox of Fritz Zwicky. Here, identify this person's portrait here. This is a Swiss German practically. A very harmful person. It can even be seen here that he is a harmful, sarcastic person. And he put a time bomb under the entire gravitational theory of Newton, Einstein, and all together. Because in the 33rd year, he discovered a very large variation in the radial velocities of the 8 galaxies of the Coma cluster. And, applying a real theorem, concluded that the stability of the cluster and its total mass should be 400 times greater than the mass of the stars entering it. Well, let's translate it into Russian. What does this mean? That Newton's theory, together with Einstein's theory, is wrong not by 3%, not by 5%, not twice, but 400 times. That is, in fact, it is not true at all. It turns out that our knowledge of gravity does not work in outer space on large systems. When he opened it, they rechecked it several times. It turned out that there is still less discrepancy inside the galaxies, only 10 times, and in clusters, hundreds of times. Well, you agree if you, let's say, come to the store and you are cheated 10 times or 400 times. Then you will raise a fuss, right? If a student makes mistakes in calculations, or there is some designer who makes mistakes 400 times in the calculations of bridges, then, well, at least he will be fired, or maybe he will be put in prison for mistakes. And here all science with the theory of gravity is wrong 10 dashes 400 times. Well, scientists thought that this was some kind of incident, so to speak, and until the end of the 20th century, they tried to sweep this problem under the carpet. In what way? They were looking for some kind of invisible matter in the form of dark stars, remnants of something there. Well, we tried to find the very real mass that would compensate. Because if there is no such mass, then clusters of galaxies should crumble immediately instantly, like a house of cards. I see, right. Scatter across the field. And galaxies can't exist either, because they don't have enough mass to do that. What is mass? Mass is what holds them together. I see, right? And if there is not enough mass 10 times, then they should crumble. But they do not crumble, and they are whole in the sky. What's the problem here? Well, I read, so to speak, reports on conferences of cosmologists on this topic. They're in the 80s and 70s. They're very large scientists wrote all sorts of theoretical reflections on this topic, but everyone recognized this problem, at least. That is, there was still honest science back then. Until the 70s, she was honest. After the 80s, science began to cheat. From my point of view, it is in this area. Well, they couldn't do anything. In the end, by the end of the last century, they decided to plug this hole with so-called dark matter. That is, they invented the word dark matter and added dark energy separately. Why is dark matter separate? That is, matter is obtained without energy, and energy without matter. Well, I do not know. It's somehow dialectical materialism does not accept such things. Matter without energy, energy without matter. But in all the pictures, in all the popular, at least expositions, dark matter and dark energy are somehow considered separately. Energy without matter and matter without energy. An elegant way out of the situation, yes, they came up with. And look, there are 96% together, even if you add up the dark energy of dark matter. Only 96% turns out. But that's not 400 to 1, is it? First of all. Secondly, it is unclear why the mass deficit in galaxies is 90% and in clusters. It is already 99%, 9/10. Why is there such a difference? Well, I haven't come across an explanation. It just has to be that way. Shut up. How is it portrayed? There are thousands of images of dark matter. This one image is about absolutely nothing. Yes, well, there are stars, there is dark matter that we do not see. Or so it is. Here there are galaxies that are held together by such a lump of dark matter, which, like anthracite, lies, so to speak, and attracts galaxies to each other. Of course, to myself more precisely. So, this explanation, from my point of view, does not stand up to serious logical criticism. So I offered my model, my version of the explanation. Now I'm going to tell you my version. It doesn't mean that this version is correct. Why? Because I have no proof. It's just another version. You understand that if there is any mystery, then it is necessary to solve it. In engineering practice, there is a so-called brainstorming technique when an unsolvable problem is collected by specialists, and everyone expresses some version that explains something there and gives some kind of suggestion. At the same time, there may be 2, 3 proposals, 10, 100, no matter how many. Everyone expresses their suggestions. Why? Because then it only becomes clear which of these heuristic sentences is correct. Not right away. Well, from my point of view of theoretical physics, only a select few are allowed to do such brainstorms. That is, there is such a caste, from my point of view, which does not allow outsiders. They cook their own porridge there. Maybe it's right, but from my point of view, it's wrong. Therefore, I will now offer my completely different version, not like the classic one. Maybe she spoke to someone else before, I do not know, because now it is very difficult to follow the information. There are just huge waterfalls of information. It's easier to rediscover the law than to break all this information and find this law. This is already such a situation. In other words, it is easier to open the law yourself than to search for them on the internet. But this is a joke, of course. So that's what it's about. Here to your right is the appearance of our entire metagalaxy. She looks like a dodecider. This is not my idea. It was a time when cosmologists, astrophysicists decided by radiation that this is exactly what this whole galaxy looks like, this structure has. Then they began to question it, but at least that was the idea. That is, if you and I fly out of our world beyond our metagalaxy, then we will see such a dodecider. And what's inside? And inside, these cobwebs are the so-called foam structure of our metagalaxy. These jumpers actually consist of superclusters of galaxies, which consist of clusters of galaxies, which consist of groups of galaxies, which consist of galaxies in which. So you understand this level, right? But this foam structure, it is quite clearly restored now according to astronomical data. In my opinion, Australian scientists have managed to build a complete picture of this galaxy, that is. It's clear where which nodes are, in which place. So now you see our whole world completely in front of you on the right. Our sun and earth are hidden somewhere very, very deep there. Here. And on the left, in some way, so to speak, a model of such a world. In other words, it is such a cellular structure in which there is a jumper. And that's the most interesting thing. Although tell me, what do you see on the right? What do you see on the left? I just want to understand, as far as you know. Yes, the girl came to my meeting for a reason, because she knows the difference between the neurons of the brain and the structures of this galaxy. But however, notice, both look the same, similar at least. Yes. In other words, it turns out that we live in some kind of neural head, in the head of some kind of creature. This metaphor is very strong. But in fact, this is exactly what the foam structure looks like, and looks exactly the same. What does this mean? From my point of view, the whole world consists of ether, and ether, it is heterogeneous. It has a structure, and this structure has its own cracks, joints, clusters, transitions. I see, right. That is, it is heterogeneous. That's when I used to speak and say that there is an ether. After that, part of the physicist got up defiantly, went out and slammed the doors. Now there are also physicists who, after listening to my speech, wave at me and say, a completely illiterate person does not know that there is no ether. But I want to say that these physicists are absolutely illiterate because they do not know that there are 2 professors at EMSU, a doctor of physics, sciences. One of them is Bychkov, who write books on the heterogeneous structure of the ether. And they have a whole seminar going on and publish it at Moscow State University. In other words, the ether is rehabilitated. I am officially declaring this to you. If he is at EMSU at the Department of Physical Mathematics, science is being researched, right? But I'm not telling you the story of the ether anymore. Why? Because there Einstein wrote that there can be no theory of relativity without the ether. And our Dmitry Bloch-Hintsov, a member of the Core, a very famous physicist from Dubna, said, yes, stop fooling people, but this is your physical vacuum itself. Use different words to call the same thing. In other words, we return to the word ether. In fact, what is ether? When you look at the sky, you see a black space. Physics says that this black space is emptiness. However, now she no longer claims that this is emptiness. She says that this sky is filled with dark matter, which is 96%, and the fact that we see stars is 4%. I think they exaggerate a lot, because I think what we see is probably 1,000% there. And everything else is the so-called dark matter, ether, physical vacuum, whatever you want to call it. But it is a material structure. So, in my opinion, this material structure is heterogeneous, and it has a cluster hierarchical structure, that is, there are its own conchs, clusters. Well, this is the most primitive image of it all. This is the granular structure of any materials, minerals, metals. If you remember physics, when you studied physics, you were told that solids have a crystal lattice, and you were shown a crystal lattice. That goes endlessly left, right, up, down, and so on. Nothing like that. These crystal lattices, they, well, have a maximum of 10 nanometers in size there. And then some failures begin in this crystal lattice, some inhomogeneities, some dislocations, some cracks, some grains. And these grains are of different sizes. That is, if you look under a microscope, you see a large grain. Look into this large grain, and you will see medium grains there. Look into each medium grain, and you will see a small grain there. Well, the same thing is on the surface of the Earth. You know that the Hartmann grid, the surface of the Earth, is the same cluster hierarchical, right? So it turns out that the same thing exists in space, and now it is, that is, our empty space, it is heterogeneous. But what is it? What conclusion does it lead to? Now here we are crawling with you slowly to the most interesting thing. Yes, the TC was a water warm-up. To your right, you can see how the crack spreads in the solid material. Well, let's say in metal or in crystal, it doesn't matter. A black crack like that, you see, right? So, cracks do not spread directly, but along the boundaries of clusters. Why? Because all dislocations, all inclusions, are concentrated at the cluster boundaries. These are weak points. Well, here's an example. Imagine that you and I are now gathered in a crowd, standing tightly pressed against each other. If you hit us, we will crumble. Why? Because the connections between us are not as strong as they are inside of us. I see, right. Figuratively, primitive, but at least understandable. The same thing inside the structure of the body has its own clusters, its own connections. And here's a crack, that is, the energy of destruction. It passes along these boundaries. And that's why it never goes strictly along the line. It always goes like this. And what does it remind you of? Now we are moving to a different scale. And this reminds us how lightning spreads. The fact is that there is such a principle of the minimum. In other words, a physicist, if you ask what the minimum is, will say, nature is not stupid, it always goes the shortest way. Why doesn't lightning take the shortest route? Moreover, it goes in a tortuous way, in such a complex, branching way, from my point of view, this crack in the ether. Energy goes along this crack, and this crack goes along the boundaries of clusters of invisible ether. That is, the lightning marks, thereby designates these very cracks. Look at her. There are large bends, there are medium bends, there are small bends. The same thing in the body. In other words, the structure is the same everywhere, cluster scale hierarchical. And when you see a thunderstorm like this, you see a visualization of the structure of the ether above the Earth's surface, in fact. Now we are moving from the cracks to the orbits of the planets. Why do planets rotate in their orbits? Why don't they fall down to the sun? There is an absolutely wonderful film, semi-esoteric, but I'm going to show it now.
Process. Planets revolve around stars. Electrons revolve around the nucleus of their atom. Why do they always rotate in strictly defined orbits and do not change their routes? Official science explains this by the perfect balance of the two forces, the force of attraction of the planets to the star and the force of acceleration of the movement of the planet. Even a child understands how unstable such a system is. It is worth at least the slightest Saliza to intervene, and the planet will quickly fall on a star or fly into space. There must definitely be other forces explaining this stability of this system. We know that the orbits of electrons are strictly defined and unchangeable. And what about the orbits of the planets of the solar system? It turns out that they are also defined and subject to strict rules, and the planets around the star, the electrons around the nucleus, seem to roll along a chute from the discharged space, and the inhomogeneities of space are created by wave vibrations. Planets are held in their orbits due to the wave structure of space. Each star system has its own frequency of sound, and the standing star, in turn, keeps the planet in orbit. As will be shown below, the rotation speed of planets around their star and around their axis is also set by the vibration frequency of a given star system.
In this film, we saw a simulation of oscillation nodes depending on the purity on a simple metal plate when sand is poured. We didn't see any ether here. We didn't see any gutters, nothing. We just saw zones where there are no fluctuations, so all the sand accumulates there. That's all we saw. But this is a model. So in this film that you saw, so to speak, there is a model according to which these are harmonious vibrations in the ether that have a certain frequency. Did you see their purity on the left? Yes. Its purity, unknown, leads to the fact that rarefied space forms some kind of gutters around the sun. Therefore, the planets rotate along these troughs. They cannot roll out of them, because the ether is denser further from this trough. They are closer, denser. I see, right. Well, that's the gutter image. In fact, what I'm telling you is practically I'm telling you a very primitive theory, so to speak, of Albert Einstein's curved space. But Albert Einstein intuitively, of course, felt it all, and he just gave a geometric image without explaining the physical reasons for these curvatures of space. In fact, space is an abstraction. A curved abstraction is still an abstraction. There is no physics here. From my point of view, our space has rarefied regions, of which, so to speak, there is less resistance to movement. And of these regions, which regularly form such orbits, they are not so regular everywhere, and our bodies move. Well, the cherry on the cake, what is gravity? Here I have two books written. It says that gravity is the pressure gradient of the ether. Since we do not see the ether, but we see some kind of order in the bodies, we say, bodies do not scatter, because they are attracted to each other. Here I specifically brought this image here. Here's a cell with eggs, right? See, yes, chicken, so transparent. If it is made invisible, the eggs will be attracted to each other and will form a crystal structure in space. So the law of gravity is the law of gravitation of eggs to each other in the package. I repeat, modern science almost does not see the packaging, and packaging is a discharged ethereal space, which has its own zones of weak, so to speak, weak density, which hold these bodies there. I've told you all this clearly, haven't I? Here. Well, you see, we have more or less run through the mega world and realized that modern physics approaches this world with the laws that are traditional for them, which are used for the microcosm. In the microcosm, there are electromagnetic forces that attract each other, repel each other. Therefore, all of this was automatically transferred there. And gravity is there. Gravity is just a huge structure, the outer ethers. And they just mark the bodies like lightning, this external structure. That's it. No attraction with ropes. Remember Tsiolkovsky's movie, right? Did you twist the bucket there? That's not the case, from my point of view. But, once again, this is only my hypothesis. Do not think that I promise any truths in the last instance. I'm talking about my vision of the world based on the difference between three worlds: micro, macro, and mega. Well, let's try to deal with the world of elements, with the microcosm. It will be much more difficult to understand here. So I literally don't hope that you will understand this. I'll explain everything to you very fluently. And if you want, you can watch all the videos on this topic and read books. So, let's start with this video. He thinks in three categories. Categories of energy, vibration, and purity. Nikola Tesla, there is nothing stationary. Everything moves, everything vibrates. One of the 7 laws of the Hermes universe is Trismegistus. What does this mean? That everything is hesitation. But the fluctuations can be different. Fluctuations can be relative to the point left-right, forward-backward, up-down. There is another kind of vibration pulsation when the body contracts and decompresses. These are also vibrations, but vibrations are, from my point of view, in a 4-dimensional space. This is already in a large-scale dimension because the dimensions change. But we know that there are pulsating stars, we are all breathing, our heart is beating, we all live in these fluctuations. Our cells fluctuate constantly, divide there, breathe. In other words, the whole world is permeated with these fluctuations. So, my version is that the world consists of maxims. I couldn't think of anything better to find than this sphere of the famous Dutch artist Maris Escher. Why? Because what is good about this sphere of Maris Escher? Well, artists are the genius that visionaries really are. They see the world much further ahead than physicists. So that's what I like about this figure. Look, when it pulsates, it also turns, that is, and at the same time it turns in one direction, it contracts, and expands in the other, that is, it immediately turns out not symmetry with respect to rotation. We get an asymmetric world, because it contracts in one direction, and it expands to the left. I see, right. The image of such twisting, right. Yes, that's why I think that these particles are ethers, so-called maximons. They consist of similar structures that pulsate, twisting, and pulsations lead to resonances. Any fluctuations in a large medium give some kind of interference. Everyone knows they add up. Everyone knows the laws of interference. And here, one of the very interesting examples is a flicker. A flicker is a phenomenon of well-known physics. I have some interpretation of it all. Now, we are going to watch a very interesting movie about a flicker show. It's a challenge. The challenge of all modern science. Scientists have been studying this problem for decades, but they are no closer to understanding it. Every hour, every second, a lot of events are happening around us. Almost all of them seem random, having no end or beginning, not obeying any laws. But time passes, and we notice how imperceptible coincidences, thin threads connecting accidents, grow into a single unbroken chain. In 1925 year, passing a current through an electron lamp, scientists found that, contrary to calculations, it barely changes its value as if it flickers. The effect was called the flickering, or flicker effect. And random fluctuations are a noise flicker. What kind of signal is that? Where do they come from? Is it possible to get rid of them somehow? It was not possible to find out. So, what is a natural phenomenon? Universal law or the will of chance? A paradox. The more objects that are independent of each other, the more accurately their behavior can be described, and the corresponding law can be deduced. It is well known to electronics engineers that the phenomenon of white noise is an accident in its purest form. It is caused by the thermal movements of electrons. Therefore, it is easy to get rid of it. It is only necessary to cool the material. But the noises do not decrease, on the contrary, they even grow. And this can't be, because it can never be. However, there is no white noise anymore. And what is there? Flicker noise. And he prefers low frequencies, flicker noise. Mysterious and everywhere existing phenomena. Random signals, which it is impossible to get rid of, they exist inside all electronic circuits, devices, systems. And, obviously, put a limit to our knowledge of the world. The third Brandenburg Concerto of the immortal Johann Sebastian Bach. Physiologists once found that it improves well-being. So, if you plot the curve of this concert, it will be, oddly enough, the curve of the noise flicker. Moreover, almost all melodic music, Mozart, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, obeys the same laws. And in general, in almost all phenomena, in astronomy and biology, physics and chemistry, the same pattern. The laws of flicker noise are governed by the tides, the rhythm of cell division, the radiation of space objects, and the train schedule in Japan. The curve of water flow in the Nera over the past 2,000 years is a flicker noise curve. Why is that? And no one knows. Maybe that's why flicker noise is also called the music of the spheres. So, we watched the movie with you. From which it follows that our whole world is subject to these long-wave oscillations, which are incomprehensible in origin. Completely incomprehensible in origin. I don't think that modern science has gone far from the moment when this film was shot. I doubt it very much. Well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's already a theory that explains it all. Why then it is very difficult to follow modern processes in science now? You need to be a generalist at the same time. And a deep specialist. Well, let my viewers, who know that our found answer to this question, forgive me. But I consulted with my friends physicists. They say, no, there is still no answer. Noise clicker is an incomprehensible phenomenon. Here is a quote from a good book by Tatua Vadim Yuryevich. Microscopic fluctuations are full of all nature, both alive and not alive. It is permeated with them. These are variations in the intensity of cosmic rays and modulation of the saturated activity of the sun, solar oscillations, macrofluctuations of the Earth's geomagnetic field, short-period variations of the Earth's electromagnetic field during an industrial explosion, dynamic mode by seismic emission, fluctuations in the cross-sectional area of chloroplasts and cells, fluctuations in the light intensity of the plant in aqueous solutions of proteins, fluctuations, holy flow, and so on, and so on. So in other words, almost everything is subject to macroscopic fluctuations. What are macroscopic fluctuations? That is, for no reason at all, some kind of environment filled with some objects that move, seemingly chaotic, suddenly begins to show some macroregular phenomena on the surface. It's impossible to explain it. I have my own explanations. I repeat once again. For me, this is just one of the versions during the process of, so to speak, a heuristic, so to speak, attack on this problem. I do not know if I am right or wrong. but I will explain it to you. Why? Because it leads us to very interesting conclusions. From my point of view, the sources of flicker noise are the beating, long four-dimensional waves of these pulsations of any objects, because maximons can also pulsate and fold. I see, right? And atoms can pulsate, and electrons can pulsate and oscillate there, and all this adds up to long waves. And we can always see a long wave because it's long. Short, no. And we get such wave antinodes, so to speak, right? You see, right? Here is a wave forming. It turns out this is the picture. So, if we apply this idea to the fact that our whole world consists of maximons of fundamental length, and they pulsate, then they also form long waves. Long waves of pulsations. If we calculate according to the laws of physics what kind of long waves there are, then I did it with my friends in physics, and found an amazing, interesting pattern. Here on the left it means, let's imagine that they all pulsate chaotically, but one way or another, sooner or later. They begin to contract according to the laws of physics, so to speak, and there appear, let's say, pulsations with a period of 1, or with a frequency of 1, 2, 3, 5, 7. Why only prime numbers? Because the numbers are not simple, they are attracted to this. 1, 3, 5, 7. I see, right. And we have a medium of maximons that are in the pulsating frequency. Let's say there is 1 minus 4010 minus 40/3 of a second, yes, the pulsation frequency. And there is a pulsation frequency, let's say 2 times less, 0.5. And it's clear, right? In other words, let's discard all these ideas about numbers, just imagine that we have a medium of maximons. Fundamental particles, Planck, which, pulsating, create this medium. And in this environment, long waves appear. This is how a modern computer calculates these long waves, although it used to be done. There on the left is the first calculation that I made. Oh no, on the right. Now. No, well, in short, the first one was done by Pythagoras. He counted the Pythagoras at the comma. He got 534,000 there. This is the convergence of 2 and 3. If you take a 2, a 3, a 5, a 7, it's in my book. If you want, you can look at all these tables and calculations there. I'm just not showing it so that you can see these numbers. Believe me, to show that in fact all this is based on some calculations. Yes, then some pulsation periodicities are formed there. And here are the periods of these pulsations between 2, 3, 5 and 7, they form long waves with a period of 20, c, and 7/10, 20 orders of magnitude. 3, 5/10 to the 30th degree. That is, a long wave that gives a wavelength of 10 to the 30th power. It is impossible to imagine. Now we are going to show it, despite the fact that it is impossible to imagine. So it turned out that if we take this left point here, these are the very maximons, and this field begins to oscillate. Then they form the first stable, absolutely stable wavelength at 20 orders of magnitude. If we set aside 20 orders of magnitude, we get exactly the size of a proton. And a proton is 99% of the matter of the universe. That's all. This is the first one. The first convergence of periods 2 and 3, quint. There is nothing more fundamental. Then 25 orders of magnitude. A hydrogen atom. 70% of the substance. Then 30 orders of magnitude. The cell is alive, but in fact it is not our living cell itself. There I have a theory about a certain grain of the world spirit that is most stable, but this is a separate topic. We will not do it now. And so on. That is, if we look at it, then 2 and 3 give a 25 period, 2 and 5 are 20, 2 and 7 are also 20. Roughly, again, right. 3 and 5 are 30, 2, 3, 5 are 20, and 2, 5 and 7 give 61 orders of magnitude. So many 61 orders of magnitude. This is the entire scale length of our universe. In other words, our dimensions of our metagalaxy are determined by four-dimensional fluctuations that are formed from periods 2, 5, and 7. Put together, they give us the limits of our metagalaxy. It is clear why she is like this. So, I repeat it again. This is what I'm showing you here. Yes, this is not physics. This is not mathematics. This is the arithmetic of the universe. Arithmetic. Because any calculator can raise 2 to the power of m, 3 to the power of m, and 5 to the power of k. There is no need to apply any theory there. I see, right. These are elementary things that you don't even need to know. In other words, we immediately get these things. And if we start putting these 20, 25 orders of magnitude, 30 orders of magnitude relative to each other, we get, one way or another, all the nodes on our scale axis. That is, what is it talking about? The fact that this hierarchical structure of the 12-wave, which we see empirically open, but back in the 70s, it finds its own explanation. There's another explanation. It's standing waves. I'm not going to touch on that now. In these flicker noises of maximins, which give long waves, large-scale long waves. I see, right? Well, I see by the eyes that it is clear. So, we are now moving on to the problems with you. How can we draw any practical conclusions from all this fantasy, right? We have finished with you with the theory. We are moving on to practical results. So, abruptly, unexpectedly. Let's see how a person masters external energy. Here is a man, his parameter on the scale axis is 2, that is, here in the second degree is a meter, yes. We all use mostly, that is, we eat plants. Plants feed on red light. The wavelength of red light is 650 per meter, that's 10 minus the fifth, right? In other words, you and I get energy from this red light. In other words, red light is the foundation of the life of all plants. It receives energy. We receive this energy, and we live. Talk, look at each other, and so on, because we have this energy source for 650 nanometers. But man differs from other animals in that he still burns some organic materials. And the first thing the man did when he separated from the animal, he lit a fire. The fire, as you see, so to speak, is chemical energy, it is oxidation. Oxidation occurs at -7th degree scales. IDS -7 is somewhere on the order of 10 angstroms per nanometer. Next, nuclear power plants appeared in the 20th century. How do they work? By splitting uranium nuclei, right? What are the sizes of uranium nuclei? 10 minus the 12th power, on the order of 10 to 20 Fermi, well, 5 to 6 Fermi. That's about it, okay, right. In other words, we see that we have got even deeper into matter, we draw energy. The next step -13 is thermonuclear fusion. Science has been knocking there for 70 years. It can't get one order of magnitude deeper. It doesn't work. There are certain reasons why it doesn't work out. Well, they're trying, but they're trying to get deeper again. Okay, right? Well, what's the logic? In other words, we are first from this level, then from this, then deeper, deeper, deeper. The logic is simple. If we extend this logic in the form of extrapolation, where are we going? Into ethereal energy. That leap, from my point of view. Why? Well, there is a certain logic there. That is, the ethereal energy, in fact, it is not hidden inside the particles, because the proton is a resonance. That cannot be destroyed. Why is it impossible to destroy? Because this is the most stable resonance in the universe. Remember, right, 2 and 5. There is simply nothing more lasting than this resonance. And that's why the proton is so difficult to destroy. There are supposedly some protons, particles, quarks there, but no one has ever seen them. No proton has ever been broken into pieces, no one knows with the theory, right? Here we are going back to the starting point. We have 3 worlds, the microcosm, the macrocosm, and the megamere. Look at this picture. Here is the system scale, key to the energy of the universe. I will explain what is depicted here. Here is the average macrocosm. You see, it's -8 in the sun. What is -8? This is chemical oxidation. These are atoms. And even deeper, -13, is nuclear power. So, all the external energy that we use on the scale axis, it is here in these 5 orders. -13 from nuclear energy to -8 chemical energy. If we go up further and start destroying molecules with you, large macromolecules, then we will not get any energy from there. If we start crushing the stones, then when the stone is broken into parts, the energy will not be released from there, as it is from the uranium nucleus atom, right? No matter how many stones you hammer, only energy cost will be. That is, we draw energy from these 2 levels, -8, -13. This is an obvious fact. Then we go up in megas. And what's there? There are 12 and 7. 7 is roughly the core of the stars, and 12 is their shell. In other words, we have risen with you by 20 orders of magnitude and got to another energy level with you, at the mega level. Here is the process of nuclear energy. The radiation of nuclear energy is provided by the fact that the core of a star, it has such a force that squeezes these very atoms, and they emit energy. In other words, the energy in space is the energy of the stars. All we see in the sky is the energy of the stars. The light comes from the stars. Where does it come from? It comes from the stars. There are no processes going on the surface of the star. The surface of the star is just some kind of fur coat. Everything goes inside the core. The same analogy. Look, the nucleus of an atom is an electron shell. The core of a star is the shell of a star. If we go higher at the macro level, we get a crystal structure that, no matter how much energy is clogged, will not be released there, no matter how hard you try. If we go higher, we get a cluster of galaxies. No one has ever seen clusters of galaxies release energy when they are destroyed. No. The same crystal structure. There is no energy there. All the energy is connected there at all. The free energy is in the depths, in the stars. On the macrocosm, it is in atoms. Let's make an extrapolation with you. Let's go down into the microcosm. What do we get? That all energy is in the range from minus 33rd to minus 28th degree. And what is minus 33rd? This is the size of the maximums. Minus 28th, we do not know that these are some kind of shells around these maxims. In other words, it turns out that ethereal energy is buried to a depth of about 20 orders of magnitude, below the chemical energy of atomic energy. It is there that we need to look for etheric energy, in the depths. What if we're trying to break up protons? Here is a large hadron collider. I have heard so, although I am not very sure that this is the correct version. It was created not to study the structure of matter and catch the Higgs boson by the tail, but to try to get deep into protons with the help of very strong blows and isolate some kind of that is absolutely fantastic energy, much greater than nuclear, thermonuclear. That is, the secret meaning was exactly that. It was expected to be of practical use. Only from my point of view, trying to extract energy from a proton is about the same as trying to break a stone with a hammer, and hope that after breaking this stone, the whole planet Earth will be heated with heat. You understand, right? In other words, it is an absolutely unrealistic task to set modern physics for yourself on all these colliders and accelerators. There is no energy inside already. There is energy in the nuclei, there is energy in the atoms, but it is not there inside the particles, because it is a resonant structure, a very high degree of strength. And where is it? This energy is in the ether, and we remember that the ether is a fractured structure. And accordingly, somewhere there between these clusters, on these cracks, there is this etheric energy. And those who know, there are such places of power, right? Geopathic zones where lightning strikes. Lightning strikes, by the way, in these places. In other words, energy should be sought not inside the particles, but outside the particles. In other words, we draw the exact opposite conclusion based on this idea. Where? Where we have geopathic zones, where we have a rarefied ether, where it is weakened, and where it is possible, with a little effort, to get a release of free ethereal energy, which is obtained naturally in nature. Sometimes we see the penetration of lightning, or the radiation of ball lightning from there, or the appearance of UFOs there. Because, from my point of view, the UFO ball lightning is free ethereal energy, which is simply temporarily structured. Then it resolves like a bubble in the ether. You know, remember, there was such a thing as Annie Benny Frex, in my opinion, yes. The spell is magical, right? I don't remember exactly what combination Pinocchio had, right, when on the field of miracles. Like Pinocchio on the field of miracles, I want to say, elements, objects, systems. This is the code, from my point of view, with its understanding, it is possible to get to a new energy, to new laws of nature, which will make our lives easier in a natural way, in the most powerful way. Well, I'm almost done with you. Thank you for your attention. In this book, The Large-Scale Harmony of the Universe, almost everything that I have told is described in great detail, proved, quotes, calculations, all this is there. Because it is impossible to present a book that has been written for 20 years in 40 minutes or even an hour. But I hope that somehow you have realized my idea. I repeat again, I'm not sure I'm right, but I think this idea is very beautiful. Thank you for your attention.